of Genesis. Genesis is a collection of origin stories starting with two versions of the story of creation. Yes, I said that correctly. There are two versions of creation. And proceeding into the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, considered the ancestors of the ancient Israelites. Often, Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac are called patriarchs because they are fathers of the tribes of Israel. You can find the reading in our Pew Bible on page 30. You can also access the reading on your tablet or smartphone via our guest internet wireless access point. From Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 through 31. The same night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Blessings on this reading of Holy Scripture this morning. I'll wrestle you for that. Now, I'm not sure how often my younger brother would present a challenge between us, but I do recall that it often involved pushing, shoving, slapping, and hitting in some way or form. Yes, your pastor was a mean older brother. And it seemed too easy at times to push my way to beating my brother with the simple talents of being older and being a little stronger than him. But despite the odds, I could always count on my brother calling out the challenge. "I'll wrestle you for that." The odds were nearly always against him. But he still pursued, he still challenged, and the experiences between us each and every time we fought changed our relationship. And some things in life are worth wrestling for, even when it is still yet unlikely that you will prevail. Most of the things that truly matter in life will often give us first a challenge to it, and will not be that easy, and often will require some overcoming of some natural disadvantage we have in order to achieve it, in order to grasp it. But it is worth wrestling for. Jacob, his name literally means heel-grabbing usurper, has challenged his older brother earlier in the story, Esau, which means Prairie, to his birthright, and took whatever advantages Jacob could to wrestle whatever he decided. His mother, Rebekah, made Jacob her favorite son. She had twin sons, but Jacob was the favorite, and Jacob took part in that elaborate deception to convince his aged blind father Isaac to give the blessing to him rather than his older twin brother Esau. When the plot was discovered, Jacob fled to his mother's brother's family in a far land, as Esau vowed that day to kill his brother Jacob. While Jacob took advantage of his brother, his mother's brother Laban took advantage of Jacob's love-struck feelings for Rachel, his second cousin. Because Jacob had hastily agreed to work for 7 years for the hand of Rachel as his bride. And after 7 years, Jacob anxiously anticipated formal relations with his new bride. And surprise, surprise, when he woke up, as the scripture says, he discovered it was Leah, Rachel's older sister. Angrily, he approached his mother's brother Laban and Laban excused himself by saying, well, it is the custom here for the older daughter to marry first, and offered Jacob yet again 7 more years of labor for the hand of Rachel. And Jacob, still love-struck, and as the scriptures say, it was a breeze those 7 years, he finally wrestled his second and beloved wife from his mother's brother's family. There's a lot of deception and wrestling throughout Genesis. And if you read some of those previous chapters before today's reading, you'll discover that there was a wrestling match even between Leah and Rachel for giving Jacob sons. Leah, who is ironically called the unloved, is much more productive in childbearing than Rachel, Jacob's beloved, was ever going to be. However, it was the children of Leah and the children of Rachel who would become the 12 tribes, the 12 namesakes of Israel. Rachel's son was Joseph. Rachel's other son was Benjamin. Now, Jacob, by this point, is middle-aged, has actually stolen quite a few flock from his brother-in-law, Laban, has stolen and dealt terribly with people, places, and things, but now he needs to go home. But he doesn't know if Esau seeks his or his family's life. So Jacob begins bargaining, begins making amends, another form of wrestling perhaps that sends these wealthy caravans of gifts to his betrayed brother. And you can sense a little in today's passage Jacob's anxiety over all this because he's heard no word of favor from Esau at all, who has received the gifts. Esau is near. Jacob knows it, so he hastens to make sure that his family is safe because he's unsure of his brother's favor or disfavor, or his forgiveness or his vengeance. So Jacob sends him across a little creek, across the Jabbok, one night, and Jacob is all alone, ready to face perhaps Esau or Esau's servants in a fight. But Jacob encounters a mysterious stranger. So strange that the text can't agree on whether this man is God in human flesh or God's agent in human's flesh. And Jacob, always the contender, always the deceiving twin, wrestles this stranger throughout the night and doesn't break his striving until he wrestles a blessing and permanent disability. Now, the text may not be definitive as to the identity of this stranger, but Jacob seems to have no doubt in his mind as to whom he wrestled. He identifies the place, as here I saw face-to-face God and lived. Pin-E-L. Pin meaning face, L meaning God. It was, as far as Jacob was concerned, God whom he wrestled. And I have a feeling that many of us have had an all-nighter wrestling with God, too. All authentic disciples have experienced the struggle and crisis of faith in the middle of the night, and often have found themselves limping away with a new understanding of the role as well as the will of God in their lives. Now, I'm not sure where this idea came from, that followers of God are not to wrestle with their faith or their beliefs, or even to admit a doubt, when the Bible is filled with stories of faith being wrestled with. Our youth leader is a former wrestler, but he could probably tell us of experiences where he could tell when he was wrestling that it really wasn't worth the effort. The other guy wasn't in the fight. A faith that doesn't struggle, belief that must be unquestioned, a custom that should not be confronted, is likely a rather unworthy adversary. And it doesn't deserve perhaps our trust or even our loyalty. A faith that isn't questioned doesn't have much strength in it. Because most of the faith stories of the Bible begin not with the simplistic answers or pious religious platitudes, but rather action, tension, and response. Struggles prove their value and worth in the midst of the challenge to overcome, to persevere, to ultimately prevail. Abraham and Sarah wrestled with God for years with their prayers for an heir, until one was given, when the mother was 95 and the man was over 100. The entire Exodus story presents us with moments where Moses is wrestling with God, God is wrestling with Moses, and God is wrestling with his stiff-necked people, the Israelites, who say, why can't we go back to Egypt all the time? Not that you ever say those things before. And the book of Job, which sometimes is mispronounced as Job. The book of Job, with his 4 friends that are just trying to prove that Job must have done something wrong, even when he seeks an answer simply to his suffering, even when Job is at the point of sickness in mind, body, and spirit. His friends cannot comprehend that God might be involved, but it might not be punishment from God. David was told he was blessed by God to rule Israel. And then he spent most of his young adulthood hiding out from Israel's first king Saul, who threatened and pursued him. The prophet Jeremiah cried out in anger to God. Several of the Psalms are written by those who have felt God has abandoned them. And even Jesus on the cross said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Words of the Psalm, Psalm 22. Wrestling with God should not be all that surprising to us then. It should be expected that we will wrestle with God. Some have prevailed, some didn't, but all were changed by that challenge, by that experience of wrestling with God. Because a faith without wrestling is probably not worth holding on to, nor is it worth defending. Our relationship with God can only be strengthened through those challenges and through those responses to struggle and suffering that are a part of our everyday existence in this broken world. Our faith can only be strengthened when it is reviewed, when it is questioned, when it is challenged, when it is examined, and when it's reformed in response to new experiences. Now, while I'm not going to encourage you from the pulpit to look around for a good fight, I would rather encourage you to get into the ring of life to wrestle with the big questions, the big challenges, and yet the big opportunities that are only available when one does enter the ring, one does apply the right kind of pressure and the right questions and desires the right response. Jacob wouldn't relent until the stranger blessed him. Wrestle with your beliefs. Challenge your assumptions and presumptions. Too often we're always looking for the supporting evidence for our prejudices rather than confronting them as they should be confronted. Wrestle your relationships at home, work, and yes, even here in church. Does your relationships really reflect what you believe? Do they reflect what you value? Do they give those? And what priorities do you have? And what do your priorities reveal? Should any of those be changed, confronted? Wrestle with the gospel, the good news. We often just rest on the good news rather than confront its cosmic implications upon all the aspects of our lives, our relationships, and our world. The gospel confronts me every day and in every way. How do I today follow Jesus? Does my following really show? Do others see Jesus in my words, in my deeds, in my values, and in my priorities? And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to wrestle with God. Jacob wasn't, and neither should you. Yes, Jacob ends up walking around with a limp following this wrestling match. But he also gained a new name. He's no longer identified as heel grabber opportunist. His new identity, his old identity is gone. His new identity is Yitzrael, which we commonly pronounce Israel. One who wrestles with God and humankind. We need God wrestlers, folks, rather than God retirees. Whatever struggles you face, look to see the face of God within them. You may be surprised how close God is already in that same struggle with you, for you, right in the midst, face to face. The struggle may never cease. Worthy causes never have an end. But worthy causes are always, always worth it. Join the struggle. Challenge your God. Wrestle for it. Because disciples can always be found in the battles for justice and righteousness. Have you joined the fight? Amen. For those of you who have experienced